Today, we will be talking about linguistic justice and how it relates to voting. This is a very important topic in the US, as there are many people who need to vote but can't speak English. I hope you enjoyed the video. What is linguistic justice? Linguistic justice is the idea that all people can live in this world without prejudice or reduced opportunities based on how they speak or what languages they speak. Since we're talking about political participation in this video, for us, linguistic justice means that people have equal access to voting, no matter what languages they speak. To give an example of linguistic injustice, a person speaking Spanish being banned from voting because of their language would be linguistically unjust. Why is linguistic justice important? You might think that Google Translate would be enough to allow people who don't speak English to be active participants in politics. In reality, you can't cast an informed ballot with just machine translation. As Maxime Wadsworth, an English to Hopi translator in Arizona, notes, it makes it very challenging when you're asked to interpret a document which generally has no place in Hopi language at all. Translation is more complicated than just finding an equivalent word and changing the word order. As a translator, it is very important to convey all the subtleties, especially since policies are all about the subtleties. A lack of translation can play a big role in preventing people from participating in the political process. The Tohono O'odham Nation does not have translation assistance at polling stations. Verlin Jose, a member of the nation, remarked that it would impact everyone, mainly the elders, mainly the people that live in communities that are remote who are still very fluent, and it's what they speak every day, when referring to the lack of translation of ballots. Overall, these translators' efforts are aimed at empowering those that need the translation, with Wadsworth saying, "It is necessary to inform, give the voters an opportunity for the information that could help them make an informed decision for themselves and the things that they believe in." By considering linguistic justice, we can empower people to fully participate in the political system and express their voices. So far, we've talked a lot about why this work is important, but what protections actually do exist currently? Believe it or not, we do actually have existing legislation on linguistic justice. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed and created many provisions intended to protect voting rights for a wide variety of minority groups. In 1975, Congress updated this act to protect rights for language minority citizens. One of the most important parts of this update was Section 203, which mandated that counties that met certain characteristics had to provide bilingual materials. These characteristics are based on the number of non-English speakers and level of education in the county. Given this, you might be thinking, if we already have legislation ensuring that people who don't speak English have access to language assistance, then why do we need to talk about linguistic justice in voting? Well, in practice, these protections fall far short of providing equal access to the ballot. For example, let's take the story of Peggy Phillips. Phillips is a member of the Navajo Nation, and her first language is Navajo. She's also a registered voter and had voted in all levels of elections before 2014 using translation assistance at the polling places. However, in November of 2014, her county moved to an all-mail-in ballot system, leaving her without translation assistance. As such, she was not able to cast an informed ballot. Now you might think that this is a violation of Section 203 and she should still be entitled to translation assistance. And you would be correct. The problem is that this portion of the VRA has never been litigated to a final judgment. This means that it is especially difficult to enforce, as there are no clear lines around what is a violation. There has also not been very much interest in this area from the public or from the Department of Justice, who are supposed to prosecute these violations. In addition to faulty enforcement, there are also gaps in existing legislation that make it difficult for some groups to vote. This is the reason that the Tohono O'odham Nation did not have translators. The qualifiers in Section 203 did not apply to them. There are also other parts to voting than just going to your local polling place on election day and casting your ballot. A big one is voter registration. Many states now have online voter registration systems that do not have translation assistance because Section 203 only applies to counties. This only further creates inequities in voting, as online registration is a very helpful tool that language minority citizens cannot use. Before we can discuss what you can do, Let's put to bed any apathetic feelings that progress is impossible. Remember Peggy Phillips? Well, after her rights had been violated, she, along with 7 others, sued their county. In 2018, they settled with the county, agreeing to maintain 3 polling stations with Navajo language assistance on election day, in-person Navajo language assistance before the election, and quality election materials in the Navajo language. By acting when she felt her rights had been violated, Phillips was able to positively impact her community. So how can you help? There are 2 primary ways that you can act: advocating for legislation and using existing legal protections to provide more assistance in your local community. We have already talked about some important pieces of legislation that would help. Advocating for legislation that would amend Section 203 to include more communities and authorize funds for states and counties to spend on translators and interpreters would do much good. This would allow more communities, such as the Tohono O'odham Nation, to have translation assistance services at polling places, while also not burdening local authorities so that they can still provide all of their existing services. Just emailing your local representative or senator would help here, as this is an issue that not many are paying attention to now. Another piece of legislation that you could advocate for is updating Section 203 to apply to states as a whole. This would force them to provide translation assistance for voter registration, which would remove another barrier from voting. There are also things you can do if you feel like there aren't appropriate translation resources in your local community. One important thing is making sure that the people who need these resources know they exist and how they can access them. To ensure this, you can encourage your registrar of voters to conduct outreach events to these communities. The Asian American Center for Advancing Justice suggests bilingual workshops, voter registration drives at community events, and distribution of information to community service organizations and media regarding the elections process, the availability of language assistance, and the rights of voters. These steps can all further outreach efforts and ensure that the options that exist for people are known. You can also volunteer to ensure that all services are actually provided on election day. As a volunteer in this capacity, you'd be able to audit the system and make sure that the legislation is actually making a difference. I hope after watching this, you feel more empowered to fight for linguistic justice in your community and can take steps towards a more just political system. Thank you.